Beggar Boy found a house inside the river and cried at what was inside. Ryan Mitchell was only 10 years old, but he already carried on his back the weight of someone who needed to survive alone on the streets of Riverside in the interior of Texas. His parents had disappeared when he was 7, leaving him to fend for himself, sleeping under bridges and begging for alms to get a plate of food. That October morning, as the sun was just beginning to warm the muddy waters of the Trinity River, Ryan dove deeper than he usually did. He had fashioned his own swimming goggles from the bottom of a clear plastic bottle and old rubber bands, hoping to find something he could sell to buy bread. It was then that his eyes widened underwater, and he had to surface quickly to breathe, his heart beating so hard it seemed to want to leap out of his chest. Down there, about 4 meters deep, was an entire house with a roof, walls, windows, and a door, as if someone had simply placed a complete residence at the bottom of the river. Ryan shook so much from fright that he almost drowned trying to get back to the surface. He had never seen anything like it in his 3 years of diving in those waters, searching for lost objects. The house seemed to have 2 bedrooms, a living room, and a kitchen, exactly like the little houses he dreamed of having one day. The windows had curtains that swayed gently with the current, and the front door was just ajar, as if waiting for someone. For 2 weeks, Ryan returned to that spot every day, but only observed the house from afar, afraid of what he might find inside. His child's imagination created stories about that mysterious discovery. Perhaps it was a haunted house, or maybe someone lived down there and didn't want to be disturbed. But curiosity grew stronger than fear, especially because he noticed there was light coming through the windows, which meant the interior wasn't completely dark. On the 3rd Monday of October, Ryan finally gathered the courage to approach the door of the submerged house. His small lungs could now stay underwater for almost 2 minutes, a skill he developed out of necessity during his fishing. With his heart racing, he slowly pushed the wooden door, which opened easily, as if it had been recently lubricated. What Ryan saw inside the house made his tears mix with the river water. The living room was completely furnished, with a sofa, coffee table, a bookshelf full of books, and framed photographs scattered all around. But these weren't just any photographs. In the frames were portraits of a smiling family, a middle-aged man, a woman with graying hair, and 3 children of different ages. What caught his attention the most was a large photograph on the main wall, where the whole family appeared in front of a house that looked exactly like the one he was in now. Ryan had to surface to breathe 3 times before he could explore the entire house. In the kitchen, there were pots, dishes, and silverware organized in the cabinets, as if the family had just stepped out for a walk and would return at any moment. In the parents' bedroom, clothes were still hanging in the wardrobe, and there was a small music box on the dresser that, when he tried to open it underwater, released some air bubbles that must have been trapped inside for a long time. But it was in the children's room that Ryan felt a pain in his chest he had never experienced before. There were toys scattered on the floor, children's storybooks on the low bookshelf, and drawings stuck to the wall with tape that hadn't completely come loose yet. One of the beds had a brown teddy bear sitting on the pillow, and Ryan felt the urge to take it, but something inside him said it wasn't right to do that. When he finally left the house and returned to the surface, Ryan cried like he had never cried before. He couldn't understand how an entire family could have abandoned all their belongings, all their memories, all the signs of a happy and well-structured life. For the first time in a long while, he missed having a family, a home, a place to call his own. During the following days, Ryan couldn't get the submerged house out of his head. He went back there every day, always in the late afternoon, when there was less activity on the river. He began to notice details he had missed on his first visit. In the living room, there was a photo album under the coffee table. When he managed to bring it to the surface, he discovered it was inside a tightly sealed plastic bag which had kept the photos completely dry. Flipping through the album on the riverbank, Ryan saw dozens of photographs of the same family at different moments: birthdays, Christmases, trips, playing in the backyard. In the older photos, the children were babies, and in the more recent ones, they already seemed to be about his age. There was one photo in particular that caught his attention: the whole family in front of a church, and in the background, a sign reading, "St. Michael's Parish, Riverside." Ryan knew that church. It was where he sometimes got a bowl of soup on Sundays, when Mrs. Elizabeth, the town hall cleaner, organized lunches for needy children. Mrs. Elizabeth had always been kind to him, unlike most adults who treated him as if he were invisible or dangerous. She had graying hair always tied in a bun, wore small glasses, and had a sad smile that Ryan never knew how to explain. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The following Wednesday, Ryan decided to take the photo album to show Mrs. Elizabeth. Maybe she knew that family. Maybe she could explain why an entire house was at the bottom of the river with all the furniture and belongings still inside. He found her sweeping the churchyard, as she did every morning before going to work at the town hall. "Mrs. Elizabeth, can I talk to you for a minute?" asked Ryan, holding the album under his arm. "Of course, my boy. What is it this time? Are you hungry?" she said, already searching her bag for some money to give him. "It's not that, Mrs. Elizabeth. I wanted to show you something." Ryan opened the album to the photo of the family in front of the church. "Do you know these people?" Mrs. Elizabeth took her glasses from her bag and looked carefully at the photograph. First she smiled, then the smile slowly faded until she turned completely pale. Her hands began to tremble, and she had to sit on the wooden bench in front of the church. "My God in heaven," she said, almost whispering. "Where did you find this, Ryan?" "Do you know them?" insisted the boy. "Know them?" Mrs. Elizabeth took the album in her hands and began to flip through the pages with tears in her eyes. "Ryan, this is my family. That man was my husband, Richard. These children were my kids, Daniel, Sarah, and Michael. That house was mine." Ryan felt a shiver run down his spine. How could that be? How was Mrs. Elizabeth's house at the bottom of the river? "But Mrs. Elizabeth, where are they now? Why didn't you tell me you had a family?" Mrs. Elizabeth took a few minutes to be able to speak. She wiped her eyes with the edge of her apron and took a deep breath before answering. "That was 15 years ago, Ryan, before you were even born. The government said they were going to build a dam near here to generate electricity. She said our house was in the area that was going to be flooded and that we had to leave. They promised they would pay us good compensation to move somewhere else. And what happened? Richard, my husband, believed the promises. He said with the compensation money we could buy a better house, maybe even in a bigger city where the children would have more opportunities. But..." Mrs. Elizabeth stopped talking and looked at the sky as if asking for strength to continue. "But what, Mrs. Elizabeth? The money never came, my boy. They built the dam, flooded our house, our land, our whole life, but the money never showed up. Richard became desperate. He sold everything he managed to save from the house to pay the rent for a little house on the outskirts, but it wasn't enough to support the family. The boys had to stop studying to work, and Sarah, my daughter Sarah, got sick from so much suffering." Ryan listened to everything in silence, holding Mrs. Elizabeth's hand firmly. One day Richard simply couldn't take it anymore. He said he was going to New York to look for work, and that he would send money to us soon. That was 12 years ago, Ryan. I never received a letter, a phone call, nothing. The boys left too, each going their own way, trying to make a life. My daughter Sarah ended up marrying a young man from another town, and she left too. I was left alone. Why didn't you tell me this before? Mrs. Elizabeth smiled sadly and stroked Ryan's face. Because it hurts too much to talk about it, my boy, and because, looking at you, sometimes I see my boys when they were little. You remind me so much of Daniel when he was your age. Ryan felt a very strong emotion grow in his chest. For the first time in a long time, someone spoke to him as if he were part of a family. Mrs. Elizabeth, I found your house. What do you mean, Ryan? It's there at the bottom of the river, completely intact, with all the furniture, all your things, all the photographs. Even the children's toys are still there. Mrs. Elizabeth looked at him with an expression of disbelief. That's not possible, my boy. When they flooded the area, they said everything would be destroyed by the force of the water. But I saw it, Mrs. Elizabeth. I went inside the house. Ryan was getting agitated. There's even that little brown teddy bear in the children's room, and a music box in your room. Mrs. Elizabeth stood up from the bench as if she had been shocked. A music box? What's it like? It's gold, with a tiny ballerina on top. When you open it, she spins and plays a tune. Mrs. Elizabeth began to cry again, but this time they were different tears. It was from my mother, Ryan. She gave it to me when I married Richard. I thought I had lost it forever. Can I take you there to see? Mrs. Elizabeth looked at the river, then at Ryan, then at the photo album she still held in her hands. I don't know how to swim, my boy. I can bring the things to you. I can bring everything, little by little. Mrs. Elizabeth hugged Ryan for the first time since they had met. You would do that for me? Of course I would, Mrs. Elizabeth. You've always been good to me. That afternoon, Ryan made his first trip as the official delivery boy. He went down to the submerged house and first brought back the music box. When he handed it to Mrs. Elizabeth, she opened it, and the little ballerina began to spin, playing a tune Ryan had never heard before, but which was the most beautiful he had ever heard in his life. During the next 2 weeks, Ryan made dozens of dives, bringing objects from the house to Mrs. Elizabeth. She had arranged a little corner in the church storage room where she could keep everything. Each item Ryan brought awakened a different memory. The pot where she made Richard's favorite beans, the candlestick she used for special dinners, the history books Daniel liked to read, Sarah's doll that she didn't want to take when she got married. But Ryan noticed that Mrs. Elizabeth grew sadder with each recovered item. One night when he brought her wedding portrait with Richard, she cried so much he became worried. Mrs. Elizabeth, why are you sad? I thought you'd be happy to have your things back. I am happy, my boy, but I'm also angry. Angry at what? At having lost 15 years of my life thinking everything had been destroyed, at having accepted that I'd never see these family memories again, at not having fought more for my rights. What do you mean? Mrs. Elizabeth sat next to Ryan on the church bench. When they built the dam, Ryan, many families lost their homes. They all had the right to receive compensation, but only some got it. Those with more education, more money, more influence. Poor folks like me ended up forgotten. But why didn't they pay? Because the person responsible for the payments preferred to keep the money for himself. At the time, it was Mr. Anthony Harris, the current mayor's father. He and some friends took the money that was ours and used it to buy land in other towns. That's theft, said Ryan, indignant. Yes, it is, my boy. But when you're poor, when you don't have an education, when you don't know important people, nobody listens to our complaints. Ryan was thoughtful for a few minutes. Mrs. Elizabeth, what if we proved they stole the money? How, my boy? It's been 15 years. Who's going to believe the word of a cleaning lady against the mayor's word? That night Ryan couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the injustice Mrs. Elizabeth had suffered, about the family separated because of powerful people's greed. He decided he would do something to help her, even though he didn't know exactly what. The next morning, he returned to the submerged house with a different goal. Instead of looking for sentimental objects, he looked for documents. He had noticed during his previous visits that there was a table in the corner of the room with drawers. If Mrs. Elizabeth kept important documents, maybe they were there. In the second drawer he opened, Ryan found a sealed plastic envelope containing several papers. When he brought it to the surface and opened the envelope, he discovered documents he couldn't read properly, but that looked important. Deeds, contracts, receipts, and a folder with the name Compensation Trinity Dam. Running, he took everything to Mrs. Elizabeth, who was on her lunch break in the town hall cafeteria. Mrs. Elizabeth, I found some things that might be important. When she saw the documents, she got so nervous she needed to sit down. My God, Ryan. These are the house papers. I thought they were lost in the move. Flipping through the documents, Mrs. Elizabeth found something that made her jump up. Ryan, look at this. It's a copy of the compensation case. It says here, I should have received 50,000 reais for the house and the land. 50,000 reais. Ryan had never heard of so much money all at once. But down here it says the payment was made, she said, pointing to a signature at the end of the document. Only I never received this money, Ryan, and that's not my signature. So they forged your signature? It seems so, my boy. Look here. It says they deposited the money in an account at the National Bank, but I never had an account at that bank. Mrs. Elizabeth spent the rest of the day studying all the documents. When Ryan returned to visit her in the late afternoon, her eyes were red, but not from sadness. It was from anger. "Ryan, these papers prove I was robbed, and not just me. Look at this list. There are 20 more families who supposedly received compensation, but I know half these people, and I know they never saw a cent of the money. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to look for a lawyer, but lawyers are expensive, aren't they?" Mrs. Elizabeth smiled for the first time in a long while. "There are lawyers who work for free to defend poor people, Ryan. It's called the Public Defender's Office. I'm going there tomorrow." On Thursday morning, Mrs. Elizabeth missed work to go to the Public Defender's Office. Ryan waited for her at the church, anxious to know what had happened. When she arrived in the middle of the afternoon, she had an expression he couldn't decipher. "So, Mrs. Elizabeth, what happened?" Mrs. Elizabeth sat on the bench and sighed deeply. "The lawyer said the case is very clear, Ryan. They really did steal from me, but he also said the deadline to sue passed a long time ago. According to the law, I should have complained within 5 years of the false payment. It's been 15, so there's no way anymore. The lawyer said there's a small chance. If we can prove that I never knew about the forgery, that I only found out now, maybe we can reopen the case, but it will be very difficult." Ryan felt a growing anger in his chest. How could there be a law that protected thieves just because they managed to hide the crime for a long time? "Mrs. Elizabeth, what if we told this story to everyone? On the radio, in the newspaper?" Mrs. Elizabeth looked at him affectionately. "You are very naive, my boy. The owner of the local newspaper is a friend of the mayor. The radio station, too. They would never publish a story against the current mayor's father. But there must be some way." Ryan spent the following days thinking of a solution. He knew every corner of Riverside, every person who begged on the streets, every merchant who sometimes gave food to hungry children. If he couldn't count on the powerful, maybe he could count on the poor. He started by looking for other families from the list he had found in Mrs. Elizabeth's documents. The first was Mr. Joseph, who sold popcorn from a cart in the central square. When Ryan showed him his name on the list and asked about the compensation, Mr. Joseph confirmed he had never received anything. "Son, back then I lived in a little house near the river. I lost everything when they built the dam. They told me they would pay me, but then they disappeared. I had to start from scratch selling popcorn to support my family. Do you remember anyone else who went through this?" "I sure do. Mrs. Martha, who worked at the school, also lost her house. Mr. Peter from the grocery store, Joe from the repair shop. It was a lot of people, boy." Ryan spent 2 weeks going around the city, looking for the people on the list. Out of 20 families, he managed to locate 12. They all told the same story. They were forced to leave their homes with the promise of compensation, but the money never came. Some, like Mrs. Elizabeth, lost their family because of the financial difficulties. Others managed to rebuild their lives with great sacrifice, but never forgot the injustice. When he told Mrs. Elizabeth what he had discovered, she was moved. "Ryan, you did work that not even a police investigator did. Now we have witnesses that this didn't just happen to me." They took all the information to the public defender's lawyer. He was impressed with Ryan's investigation and said that with so many witnesses, it was indeed possible to reopen the case. "But there's a problem," said the lawyer. "If you sue the current mayor for his father's actions, you could face persecution, especially you, Elizabeth, who works at City Hall." Mrs. Elizabeth looked at Ryan, then at the lawyer. "Doctor, I've already suffered 15 years because of this injustice. If I stay quiet now, I'll suffer for the rest of my life. At least by fighting, I have a chance to recover what is mine." The next day, Mrs. Elizabeth was called into the mayor's office. Ryan waited for her at the City Hall door, worried about what might happen. When she came out, she was pale and trembling. "What happened, Mrs. Elizabeth?" "He said he found out I'm making up stories about his father. He said if I keep this up, I'll lose my job, and no one in town will hire me again. Are you going to give up?" Mrs. Elizabeth looked at Ryan with a determination he had never seen before. "Of course not, my boy. Now I'm sure we're on the right path. If they're scared, it's because they know they did something wrong." The following week, the lawyer officially filed the lawsuit. The case began to spread through town via neighbors' conversations. comments at the market, whispers in church. The 12 families Ryan had found united to support each other. But the reaction from the powerful wasn't long in coming. Mr. Joseph had his popcorn cart license revoked by the health department. Mrs. Martha, who worked at the school, was transferred to a rural school 50 kilometers from town. Joe from the repair shop started getting constant visits from inspectors, who found problems where there had never been any before. One afternoon, as Ryan was returning from another visit to the submerged house, he found Mrs. Elizabeth crying on the church bench. "What's wrong, Mrs. Elizabeth?" "They fired me, Ryan. They said I'm doing political activism on work time and that it's against City Hall rules." Ryan sat beside her and took her hand. "Will you have no money for food?" "I will, my boy. My salary barely covered rent and food. Now I don't know what will become of me." That night, Ryan made a decision that would change his life forever. Instead of sleeping under the bridge as he always did, he knocked on the door of the small house Mrs. Elizabeth rented in the backyard of an elderly woman's home. "Mrs. Elizabeth, can I live with you?" She opened the door and saw Ryan there, wet from the rain that had started to fall, holding a plastic bag with his only belongings. "Ryan, my boy, I would love to have you with me, but I don't even know how I'll pay next month's rent." "We'll manage together, Mrs. Elizabeth. I know how to get money on the streets, I know how to fish in the river, I know how to find fruit in the woods, and you know how to cook, you know how to take care of a home. Together we can do it." Mrs. Elizabeth hugged him and cried, but this time they were tears of joy. "All right, my boy, let's try." From that day on, Ryan and Mrs. Elizabeth became a real family. He went out early to earn money by selling objects he found in the river or doing odd jobs at the market. She stayed home organizing the lawsuit documents and taking care of the things Ryan kept bringing from the submerged house. But the financial situation was getting harder and harder. The landlord of the house they lived in was a friend of the mayor and began pressuring them to move out. The lawsuit was moving slowly, and the lawyer said it could take years for a final decision. That's when something unexpected happened. Ryan was at the river, on another of his dives into the submerged house, when he noticed someone on the bank watching him. When he surfaced, he saw it was a young woman with a camera in her hand. "Hi," she said. "Can you explain what you're doing down there?" Ryan was scared. Maybe she was someone from City Hall who had come to forbid him from diving in the river. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he said, preparing to run. "I know you're not doing anything wrong. In fact, I'm very curious. My name is Jennifer. I'm a journalist from Houston. I came to do a story on the dam, and some people told me about a boy who dives in the river looking for objects from flooded houses." Ryan relaxed a little, but was still wary. "And what do you want with me?" "I want to tell your story. People have a right to know about these houses at the bottom of the river, about the families who lost everything and were never compensated." Ryan thought of Mrs. Elizabeth, of all the other families who had been harmed, of the struggle they were facing alone against much more powerful people. "Are you really going to publish the story?" "Yes, I am. I work for a major newspaper that reaches the entire state. I also do stories for a television program that investigates injustices like this one." Ryan took Jennifer to meet Mrs. Elizabeth. When the journalist saw all the objects recovered from the submerged house, all the documents that proved the compensation forgeries, she was deeply moved. "This story is incredible," said Jennifer. "You have proof of everything. This could change not only your situation, but that of many other families across the country who went through the same thing." Mrs. Elizabeth told the whole story to Jennifer. The loss of the house, the disappearance of the family, the 15-year fight alone, the meeting with Ryan, the discovery of the documents. Jennifer recorded everything and took dozens of photographs. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out now continuing. "May I photograph some objects from the submerged house?" asked Jennifer. "Of course," said Ryan. "I can even take you down there if you know how to swim." Jennifer was a good swimmer and had professional diving equipment. When she went down to the house with Ryan, she was impressed by how well preserved everything was. "It's incredible," she said after they surfaced. "It's as if the family left yesterday. This story is going to shock the entire country." A week later, The story was published in the Houston newspaper under the headline, "Boy Finds Intact House at Bottom of Dam and Discovers Corruption Scheme in Compensations." The report occupied 2 full pages, with photos of the submerged house, the forged documents, and of Ryan and Mrs. Elizabeth. The impact was immediate. Other newspapers reprinted the story, radio programs discussed the case, and Jennifer's television program dedicated an entire episode to the story. Within days, Riverside became known across the country. The mayor tried to deny everything, saying the report was full of lies and that his father had always been an honest man. But the evidence was irrefutable. More families from other cities began seeking lawyers, reporting similar situations. The state attorney's office opened an official investigation into the case. Prosecutors came from Houston to hear all the witnesses and examine the documents. The current mayor's father, Anthony Harris, who was now over 80 years old, was called to testify. During his testimony, he admitted that perhaps some irregularities had occurred in the compensation process, but said he was just an employee following orders from superiors. But the documents showed he had personally signed several forgeries. The pressure on the current mayor became unsustainable when it was discovered he had used public money to buy a ranch in his father's name, precisely during the period when the compensations should have been paid. He was removed from office, and a state intervention took over the city hall. For Ryan and Mrs. Elizabeth, the change was dramatic. In addition to the original compensation that should have been paid 15 years earlier, Mrs. Elizabeth received compensation for moral damages and for the interest over the period. The total amount reached $200,000. But what moved Mrs. Elizabeth the most wasn't the money. It was a phone call she received on a Thursday morning. "Mom?" It was the voice of Sarah, her daughter, who had seen the report on television. "Sarah, my daughter." Mrs. Elizabeth cried so much she couldn't speak properly. "Mom, I saw everything on TV. I didn't know you had gone through all that alone. I'm coming home, Mom. I want to meet this boy who took care of you." Daniel and Michael, her sons, also called that same day. The 3 had seen the news report and wanted to reunite with their mother. Daniel said he was living in New York and had a small construction company. Michael was in California, married with 2 young children. Sarah lived in rural Texas with her husband and a daughter. The family reunion happened on a Sunday in December at the new house Mrs. Elizabeth had bought with the compensation money. It was a simple house, but with a large backyard where she could plant flowers and raise chickens, as she had always dreamed. When the children arrived, Ryan was nervous. What if they didn't like him? What if they thought he was taking advantage of Mrs. Elizabeth's kindness? But Daniel was the first to hug him. "So, you're the Ryan who took care of our mother," he said. "We can't thank you enough." Sarah also hugged him and said, "You're our brother now, Ryan, part of the family." Michael brought his 2 young children, who were enchanted by Ryan and his stories of diving in the river. Soon they were playing in the backyard, as if they were real cousins. During lunch, Mrs. Elizabeth told the whole story again, this time to her reunited family. She spoke about the difficult years after the flood, about how she felt abandoned, about the day Ryan appeared in her life like a guardian angel. "Mother," said Daniel, "forgive me for leaving and letting you be alone. We thought we could make a better life away from here and would come back to get you later. But time kept passing, and we always thought it still wasn't the right time." "I also ask for forgiveness," said Sarah. "I should have kept in touch. I should have come to visit more often." Michael also apologized, and they all cried a lot, but they were tears of joy and reconciliation. From that day on, the family was reunited. Daniel decided to open a branch of his company in Riverside to be closer to his mother. Sarah and her husband bought a house in town. Michael would come to spend holidays with the children at least 3 times a year, and Ryan gained not just a mother, but an entire family that welcomed him as a true son and brother. But the story of Ryan and Mrs. Elizabeth had impacts that went far beyond their personal lives. The case gained so much national attention that the federal government created a special commission to investigate similar cases across the country. They discovered that what happened in Riverside had been repeated in dozens of other cities. A law was passed in the National Congress, nicknamed the Ryan Act, which guaranteed families harmed by infrastructure projects the right to claim compensation even after the legal deadline, provided they could prove they were victims of fraud. Ryan, who now studied at a private school paid for by Daniel, became a national symbol of courage and determination. He was invited to speak at schools, universities, and human rights events across the country. He always told his story simply, emphasizing that any child can make a difference if they have the courage to fight for what is right. The submerged house became a tourist attraction in Riverside. The city created a glass-bottom boat tour so people could see the house without needing to dive. Part of the money raised went to a fund to help other families in vulnerable situations. Ryan continued diving in the river, but now for pleasure, not out of necessity. He discovered other submerged houses and helped more families recover objects of sentimental value. He started a small recovery diving business, always with the support of Daniel, who understood business. Mrs. Elizabeth became a kind of informal counselor for people facing bureaucratic injustices. Her house was always full of neighbors, asking for help understanding documents, finding lawyers, or simply venting about their difficulties. She never charged anything, and always offered a little coffee and a word of affection. Richard, Mrs. Elizabeth's husband, never returned, but she discovered, through a private investigator that Daniel hired, that he had gone to work on a construction site in New York and had died in an accident 3 years after leaving home. He had tried to send money to the family, but the address he had was for the house that had been flooded, so the letters never arrived. The discovery was painful, but it also brought peace to Mrs. Elizabeth. She finally understood that Richard had not abandoned the family for lack of love, but had been another victim of the circumstances created by the injustice they suffered. In memory of Richard, the family planted a tree in the backyard of the new house. Every year on the anniversary of his departure, they gathered under the tree to tell stories about him to the grandchildren who never knew him. Ryan grew up and became a responsible and studious young man. He earned a scholarship to study law at university, with the goal of becoming a lawyer and continuing to help people in situations similar to what he and Mrs. Elizabeth faced. During college, he wrote his thesis on rights of communities affected by infrastructure projects, which became an academic reference on the subject. The work was based not only on legal theory, but on his practical experience of someone who lived through the effects of injustice firsthand. When he graduated, Ryan opened a public interest law office in Riverside, offering free services to low-income people. His first case was defending a family of fishermen who were being evicted to make way for a tourism development. Mrs. Elizabeth, now 70 years old, remained active and healthy. She had become a respected figure in the city, consulted by politicians and business people when they wanted to develop projects that would affect the local community. Her opinion carried weight because everyone knew her story of struggle and victory. She never married again, saying that Richard had been the love of her life. But she found a different kind of happiness, being a mother not only to her biological children and to Ryan, but to dozens of needy children who frequented her home and found their affection, food, and guidance. The partnership between Ryan and Mrs. Elizabeth continued even after he became an adult. He always consulted her on difficult cases, valuing her practical wisdom and her ability to understand people's suffering. She was his unofficial advisor, the person who helped him keep his feet on the ground and always remember his origins. Once, a reporter asked Ryan what had been the most important moment of his life. He answered without hesitation, "It was when I decided to tell Mrs. Elizabeth about the house at the bottom of the river. At that moment, I didn't know it, but I was changing not only my life and hers, but the lives of thousands of people who had suffered similar injustices." And Mrs. Elizabeth, when asked what made her most proud, always answered, "Seeing Ryan transform from an abandoned boy into a man who dedicates his life to defending the rights of the weakest. He gave me back my family, but more than that, he showed me that it's worth fighting for what is right, no matter how long it takes." Their story inspired a film that was released 5 years later, titled The House at the Bottom of the River. The film won several national and international awards, and all proceeds were donated to organizations working with street children. Ryan and Mrs. Elizabeth participated in the film's production as consultants, ensuring the story was told in a faithful and respectful way. They insisted that the film not romanticize poverty or injustice, but show the raw reality of those who live in such situations. On the day of the premiere, which took place in Riverside before reaching the theaters of big cities, the entire community gathered in the central square to watch. Ryan and Mrs. Elizabeth were in the front row, moved to see their story being told to the world. After the screening, there was a Q&A session with the audience. A child of about 10 years old, the same age Ryan was when he found the submerged house, raised his hand and asked, "Uncle Ryan, how can I help people who are suffering injustice?" Ryan was moved by the question and answered, "First, you need to open your eyes to see the suffering around you. Second, you need to have the courage to care about other people's problems. And third, you can never give up, even when it seems you're too small to make a difference. I was just a street kid when I started this fight, but look what it became." This answer became a motto for many children and young people who watched the film. Several schools created projects inspired by Ryan's story, where students investigated problems in their communities and sought solutions. 10 years after the discovery of the submerged house, Riverside had transformed into a model city for community participation and public transparency. The case had created a culture of active citizenship, where residents felt empowered to question authorities and fight for their rights. The dam, which was once a symbol of injustice and family separation, became a symbol of overcoming and community unity. On its banks, a memorial to the affected families was built, with plaques containing the names of all the people who lost their homes and a statue representing Ryan diving into the river. Every year, on the anniversary of the discovery of the submerged house, the community gathered for Courage Day, a date created to celebrate the importance of fighting for rights and solidarity among people. Children from schools in the region visited the memorial and heard the story told by the protagonists themselves. At one of these celebrations, when Ryan was 25 and Mrs. Elizabeth was 75, she gave a speech that moved the entire audience. "When I lost my home 20 years ago, I thought I had lost everything: my family, my dignity, my hope. But today I understand that sometimes we lose one thing to gain something much greater. I lost a house, but I gained a son of the heart who taught me that true wealth lies in having the courage to fight for others." Ryan responded, "And I, who grew up without family, without a home, without prospects, found at the bottom of a river much more than lost objects. I found a mother, a family, a life purpose. I learned that it doesn't matter where you come from or how difficult your situation is. What matters is having the courage to do what is right and never giving up the fight for justice." The audience stood up and applauded for long minutes. Among those present were dozens of families who had been helped by the Ryan Act, lawyers who were inspired by the story to work with social causes, journalists who continued investigating corruption cases, and young people who chose their professions motivated by the example of Ryan and Mrs. Elizabeth. Jennifer, the journalist who had made the story known nationally, was also present. She had become one of the country's leading corruption investigators, always remembering that her career changed course the day she met a brave boy on the banks of a river. After the official event, Ryan and Mrs. Elizabeth walked together to the edge of the dam. It was a ritual they always did when they wanted to talk about important things or simply reminisce. "Mrs. Elizabeth, have you ever thought what our lives would be like if I hadn't found your house that day?" asked Ryan. "I have, my son. I probably would have died alone and bitter, never knowing what had happened to my family. And you would have stayed on the streets, maybe followed a very different path, and look where we are now, that's true. But do you know what makes me proudest, Ryan?" "What, Mrs. Elizabeth?" "It's not the money we received, it's not the fame our story brought, it's not even the awards and recognition. What makes me proudest is seeing how many other people were helped because of our fight, how many families recovered their rights, how many children had better opportunities, how many young people were inspired to fight for justice." Ryan smiled and hugged Mrs. Elizabeth. "You're right. The best part of this whole story is knowing it didn't end with us. It continues every day, every time someone decides to have the courage to face an injustice." They stayed there for a few minutes, looking at the calm water of the dam. Below, at a depth of 5 meters, the house where it all began remained intact, preserved as a symbol of memory and resistance. Every now and then, Ryan still dove down there, not to search for more objects, but to connect with his roots and remember the extraordinary transformation that a casual discovery can trigger in people's lives. That day, as they walked back home, Mrs. Elizabeth said something Ryan would never forget. "You know, my son, sometimes I'm thankful I lost my house 20 years ago." "Why, Mrs. Elizabeth?" "Because if I hadn't lost it, I would never have gained a son like you, and I would never have learned that we are much stronger than we think when we have the courage to fight for what is right." This conversation happened on a Friday in March. The following Sunday, during the weekly family lunch at Mrs. Elizabeth's house, Daniel made an announcement that surprised everyone. "Mom, we've decided to create a foundation in the family's name to continue the work you and Ryan started." "What kind of foundation?" asked Mrs. Elizabeth. "A foundation that will provide free legal assistance to families who have suffered injustices related to infrastructure projects, and it will also work with education, giving scholarships to underprivileged children." Sarah added, "We've already talked with Ryan, and he will be the legal director. I will handle the educational part and Michael will manage the finances." Mrs. Elizabeth was moved. Her children, who once had to separate because of an injustice, were now uniting again to prevent other families from going through the same suffering. The Elizabeth Mitchell Foundation was inaugurated a year later in a modern building in downtown Riverside, but with branches in several cities across the state. The foundation's symbol was the silhouette of a house underwater, representing that sometimes you have to dive deep to find the truth. Ryan assumed the legal directorship of the foundation, but continued handling individual cases at his firm. His specialty was complex situations, where ordinary people faced powerful opponents. He had developed a reputation as a lawyer who never refused a case due to a client's lack of resources. Sarah created an innovative scholarship program that not only paid for the children's schooling but also offered psychological and social support for the entire family. The program was based on the idea that it's no use educating only the child if the family environment remains troubled. Michael developed a financial sustainability model that allowed the foundation to be independent of external donations. Part of the income came from consulting services Ryan provided to companies that wanted to avoid conflicts with communities affected by their projects. Mrs. Elizabeth, even in her 70s, remained active in the foundation. She had become the special counselor for cases involving the elderly or fractured families. Her life experience and her ability to understand human suffering made her a key piece in the team's work. 5 years after the foundation's creation, she had already assisted over 1,000 families across the state. The results were impressive. 80% of the cases had been resolved favorably, and many situations of historical injustice had been remedied. The Foundation's work caught the attention of international human rights organizations. Ryan was invited to speak at the United Nations about models of reparation for communities affected by major infrastructure projects. When he returned from New York, Ryan told Mrs. Elizabeth about the experience. "Mrs. Elizabeth, I spoke about our story to representatives from 50 countries. Many of them have problems similar to what happened here. Our struggle has inspired other people all over the world." Mrs. Elizabeth smiled with pride. Who would have thought that a poor 10-year-old boy and an abandoned cleaning lady would influence international policies, right? It's amazing how a small action can grow and turn into something much bigger than we imagined. In that conversation, Mrs. Elizabeth revealed something she had never told anyone. "Ryan, you want to know something? On the day you showed me those photographs of my family, I almost couldn't believe it was true. I thought you were making up a story to get my attention." "Really, Mrs. Elizabeth, really. But when you brought my mother's music box, I knew it was all true. And in that moment, for the first time in 15 years, I felt that God had not abandoned me." "And what do you think today?" "Today I am sure that you appeared in my life exactly at the right time in the right way to teach me that it's never too late to start over, and that it's worth fighting for our rights no matter how many years have passed." This conversation happened on a Sunday afternoon in Mrs. Elizabeth's backyard. They were under the tree they had planted in memory of Richard, surrounded by Sarah and Michael's grandchildren, who were playing on the grass. One of the children, Emily Grace, Sarah's daughter, approached Ryan and asked, "Uncle Ryan, is it true that you lived on the street when you were little?" "It's true, Emily Grace. And you didn't have a mom or a dad? I didn't. I was alone when I was 7 years old. The girl was thoughtful for a few seconds, then said, But now you have Grandma Elizabeth. You have Dad, Mom. You have us. So you gained a family, right? Ryan was moved by the child's simplicity and wisdom. I did, Emily Grace, and you all also gained an uncle who loves you very much. The girl ran off to play with her cousins, and Mrs. Elizabeth commented, Children have a way of seeing things that is sometimes much clearer than adults, right? They do. Emily Grace summed up in 2 sentences what took us years to fully understand. At that moment, Daniel approached with important news. Mom, Ryan, you know your case has become a subject of study in universities all over the world, right? We knew it was being studied in some law schools, said Ryan. Not just law, also in social work, journalism, public administration, and even psychology courses. A professor from Harvard University in the United States wants to come here to interview you for research on social mobilization. Mrs. Elizabeth laughed. Imagine me who barely finished elementary school. I'm going to be interviewed by a Harvard professor. You underestimate your own wisdom, Mrs. Elizabeth, said Ryan. What you've learned in life is worth more than many university degrees. The Harvard professor's visit happened 3 months later. Dr. Sarah Johnson was an expert in grassroots social movements and was writing a book about how small actions can generate major social transformations. For 2 days, she interviewed Ryan, Mrs. Elizabeth, and several other people involved in the story. She also visited the submerged house, the memorial, the foundation, and spoke with families who had benefited from the Ryan Act. At the end of the visit, Dr. Johnson made a statement that impressed everyone. In 30 years studying social movements, I have rarely seen a case where the combination of individual courage, community solidarity, and persistence in the fight for justice generated such comprehensive and lasting results. Your story should be taught in schools worldwide as an example of active citizenship. Dr. Johnson's book, titled From the River's Bottom, How a Boy's Discovery Changed a Nation's Laws, was published 2 years later and became an international academic reference on social mobilization. Ryan received a copy in English, and even without fully mastering the language, managed to understand that his story was being told in a respectful and inspiring way. The book had an entire chapter dedicated to the lessons that community leaders from other countries could learn from the Riverside case. The international repercussion brought visitors from various countries to the small town. Students, researchers, journalists, and human rights activists wanted to see the place where it all began. The City Hall created a tourist itinerary called the Path of Courage, which included Mrs. Elizabeth's house, the Dam Memorial, the Foundation's headquarters, and a stop at the river where Ryan used to dive. The tour was guided by young people from the community itself, who had been trained to tell the story authentically. Responsible tourism became an important source of income for the town, but Ryan and Mrs. Elizabeth insisted that it not distort the community or turn their struggle into a spectacle. They actively participated in planning the tourism activities, ensuring everything was done with respect and dignity. In a meeting with tourism business owners, Mrs. Elizabeth gave a speech that was widely applauded. You can make money telling our story, and we have no problem with that. But remember that behind this story are real people who truly suffered. Do not turn our suffering into entertainment. Use our story to educate, to inspire, to teach values. That is what will make the tourism here different and special. This philosophy became the trademark of tourism in Riverside. Visitors didn't come just to see the places where the story happened, but to participate in workshops on human rights, attend lectures on community mobilization, and learn about social projects inspired by the story of Ryan and Mrs. Elizabeth. 10 years after the launch of Dr. Johnson's book, Ryan received an unexpected proposal. UNESCO wanted to designate Riverside as a World Heritage City in the category of resistance and human rights. The proposal was discussed in a popular assembly, as all important matters in the town had been decided since the dam case. The community decided to accept the designation, but with conditions. The recognition could not be used for predatory commercial purposes, and part of the generated resources had to be allocated to social projects in the region. The designation ceremony took place on a September morning, with the presence of international authorities, representatives of human rights organizations, and hundreds of people from neighboring communities. Ryan, now 35 years old, gave a speech representing the entire community. When I was a 10-year-old boy searching for objects at the bottom of the river to survive, I never imagined that discovery could result in a recognition like this. But today, I understand that the true prize is not this UNESCO title. The true reward is knowing that our struggle inspired other people not to give up on their rights, not to accept injustices, to believe it's possible to change the world, starting with their own community. Mrs. Elizabeth, at 80 years old, was also invited to speak. I lost my first house 25 years ago, but today I understand that house was made only of bricks and cement. The house I gained afterwards is made of love, solidarity, justice, and hope. This house no one can flood, no one can destroy, no one can steal. It is in the heart of every person who learned from our story that it's worth fighting for what is right. The audience was so moved, there was a standing ovation that lasted more than 5 minutes. After the official ceremony, there was a community celebration in the central square. Local bands performed, artists recited poetry inspired by the story, schoolchildren put on theatrical performances depicting the key moments of the struggle. But the most emotional moment was when Emily Grace, now 15 years old, read an essay she had written for school about her family's history. My grandmother Elizabeth taught me that life sometimes takes everything from us to give us something much better. My uncle Ryan taught me that it doesn't matter how old you are or where you come from, you can always make a difference in other people's lives. That is the greatest legacy my family can leave me, the courage to fight for a fairer world. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing. That night, after all the guests had left and the town returned to silence, Ryan and Mrs. Elizabeth took their ritual walk to the dam's edge. It was a tradition they had kept for over 20 years, whenever they wanted to reflect on important moments. "Mrs. Elizabeth, can you believe everything that happened?" asked Ryan. "Sometimes it feels like a dream, my son. When I wake up in the morning and see that house full of photographs of the family together, when I see you graduated, married, with a beautiful career, when I think of the thousands of people who were helped because of our struggle, sometimes it seems impossible that all this started with you diving for old bottles." Ryan had married 2 years earlier to Amanda, a social worker he met during one of the foundation's projects. They lived in a house near Mrs. Elizabeth's and were expecting their first child. "You're going to be a great grandmother," said Ryan, touching Amanda's growing belly. "He will be the most loved baby in the world," replied Mrs. Elizabeth, smiling. "We've already thought of a name. If it's a girl, she will be named Elizabeth in your honor." Mrs. Elizabeth was so moved she had to sit on the bench that had been built there on the bank. "Ryan, I never thought I'd live to see the day I'd have a great-granddaughter with my name. And if it's a boy, he will be named Richard, in honor of your husband." "My goodness, you're going to make me cry with joy." They stayed a few minutes in silence, watching the calm waters of the dam reflecting the stars. Below, the house where it all began was still there, preserved by time and the waters, like a time capsule holding the memory of a family and the beginning of a transformation that changed the lives of thousands of people. "Do you still think about what would have happened if I hadn't found your house?" asked Ryan. "I do, and I always come to the same conclusion. If it hadn't been you, it would have been someone else, in some other way. When an injustice is too great, sooner or later the truth comes out. You were just the instrument God chose for it to happen at the right time." "Do you really believe that?" "I do, my son, but that doesn't diminish your merit. God may have chosen you, but you chose to accept the mission. You could have found the house and stayed quiet. You could have taken the objects and sold them without looking for me. You could have given up when things got tough, but you did none of that. You chose to do what was right, even though you were just a child alone in the world." Ryan smiled and hugged Mrs. Elizabeth. "I had a good teacher showing me what was right." They walked back home slowly, enjoying the cool night and the tranquility of the town that now slept in peace, knowing that its story of resistance and victory continued to inspire people all over the world. 3 months later, Elizabeth Mitchell Carter was born. the first child of Ryan and Amanda. Mrs. Elizabeth, now a great-grandmother, was moved to hold the girl in her arms for the first time. "Welcome to the world, little Elizabeth," she said with tears in her eyes. "You were born into a family that learned to fight for its dreams and never give up on what is right. I hope you grow up with that same courage." The baby's baptism was a great community celebration. The church was packed with people who had followed the family's entire story. The priest, in his homily, spoke about how love and solidarity can transform tragedies into blessings. During the party, Daniel made an emotional toast. 25 years ago, our family was torn apart because of an injustice. Today we are here, reunited, celebrating the birth of a new generation that will grow up knowing one should not passively accept the injustices of the world. Elizabeth will grow up hearing the story of how a brave boy brought our family, our dignity, and our faith in justice back to us. Sarah added, "And she will grow up knowing she is part of something bigger than our family. She is part of a community that learned to fight for its rights and help others do the same." Michael raised his glass, a toast to little Elizabeth, who represents the continuity of a fight that should never end, the fight for a more just and caring world. Everyone toasted, moved. Among the guests were Jennifer, the journalist who had made the story known. Dr. Johnson, who had returned from the United States especially for the celebration, dozens of families who had been helped by the foundation, and young lawyers inspired by Ryan to work with social causes. Amanda, still recovering from childbirth, insisted on speaking. "I met Ryan when he was already a recognized lawyer, when your story was already famous. But what made me fall in love with him wasn't his fame or his success. It was seeing how he remained the same humble and generous person he always was. Elizabeth will grow up having as an example a father who never forgot where he came from and a grandmother who never lost hope, even in the most difficult moments." Little Elizabeth grew up hearing this story since she was a baby. At 5 years old, she already knew how to tell her school friends how Daddy had found Grandma Elizabeth's house at the bottom of the river. At 10, she did a school project on human rights based on her family's story. Mrs. Elizabeth, at 85, remained active and lucid. Every day she would take Elizabeth for a walk in the square, to visit the memorial, to meet people in the community. The girl grew up immersed in a culture of solidarity and social justice. One Saturday afternoon when Elizabeth was 12, she asked her father, "Daddy, can I work at the foundation when I grow up too?" "Of course you can, sweetheart, but you can choose any profession you want. The important thing is to always remember to use your talents to help other people. I want to be like you, and like Grandma Elizabeth, I want to fight for people's rights." Ryan was moved. His daughter was growing up with the same values he had learned from Mrs. Elizabeth. By that time, the Elizabeth Mitchell Foundation had already expanded to other states. Ryan had trained dozens of young lawyers who took the work model to their cities. The Elizabeth Method, as it became known, combined competent legal assistance with human care and community mobilization. The foundation's success caught the attention of the federal government, which invited Ryan to coordinate a national free legal assistance program based on the model developed in Riverside. Initially, Ryan hesitated to accept. He knew that working in Washington would mean being far from Mrs. Elizabeth, who was already advanced in age, and far from the community where he had grown up and built his life. Mrs. Elizabeth, when she learned of the proposal, was categorical. "You have to accept, my son. Your mission is not to take care of me. It is to take our experience to help as many people as possible. I will be fine here, with Sarah, Daniel, Michael, and all the grandchildren, and you will come visit us whenever you can. But what if you need me? Ryan, I am 85 years old and have already lived much more than I imagined when I was 50, and alone and desperate. Everything I have lived after 70 was a gift. If I leave tomorrow, I will leave knowing that my life had meaning, that our struggle was worth it, that I left a united family and a transformed community. That is more than many people manage to leave as a legacy." With tears in his eyes, Ryan accepted the proposal. He moved to Washington with Amanda and Elizabeth, but returned to Riverside at least once a month. The national program coordinated by Ryan was a success. In 5 years, it was implemented in all U.S. states, benefiting more than 100,000 families. The U.S. model of community legal assistance became an international reference, being adapted for other countries in Latin America and Africa. During this period, Mrs. Elizabeth remained active in the Riverside community. At 88 years old, she still participated in the Foundation's meetings, received visitors interested in the history, and maintained her routine of helping neighbors with bureaucratic problems. One Sunday morning, Sarah found Mrs. Elizabeth sitting in the backyard, under Richard's tree, with a serene smile on her face. She had passed away in her sleep, without suffering, surrounded by the family photographs that Ryan had recovered from the bottom of the river so many years before. Mrs. Elizabeth's wake was a celebration of her life. Thousands of people came from all over the country to say goodbye to the woman who had become a symbol of resistance and hope. Ryan, devastated by the loss, insisted on speaking at the funeral. Mrs. Elizabeth taught me that sometimes we lose one thing to gain something much greater. Today, I lost the mother of my heart, but I gained the certainty that her legacy will continue to live on through all the people she inspired. She taught me that the true heritage we leave in the world is not material possessions, but values, examples, and transformations that remain after we are gone. Elizabeth, now 15 years old, also wanted to speak. My great-grandmother taught me that no matter how many times life knocks us down, we can always get back up if we have courage, and if there are people willing to help us. She taught me that we are stronger when we take care of each other. I promised to continue fighting for the values that she and my father taught me. After the funeral, the family gathered to read a letter that Mrs. Elizabeth had left. My dear children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, if you are reading this letter, it is because my mission on this earth has come to an end. Do not be sad for me. I lived a full and happy life, especially after Ryan brought our family back. When I was young, I thought happiness was in having a beautiful house, money in the bank, and a quiet life. After I lost everything, I learned that true happiness is in having a purpose, in knowing that our life made a difference in the lives of others. Ryan, my dear son, you gave me much more than I gave you. You gave me a family. You gave me a purpose. You gave me the joy of seeing that justice can prevail. Continue your fight, but don't forget to be happy. Take care of Elizabeth, of Amanda, of your siblings. Love deeply and be loved. Elizabeth, my dear great-granddaughter, you carry my name, but I hope you carry my values most of all. Be as courageous as your father, as generous as your mother. Be just always. The world needs people like you. Sarah, Daniel, Michael, you gave me the joy of being a mother again after years thinking I had lost that possibility. Forgive me for the years we didn't know about each other. What matters is that we found each other and lived many happy years together. Continue the Foundation's work. Continue helping people in need. Continue fighting for a more just world. That is the best way to honor my memory. Do not mourn for me. Celebrate everything we lived through together. Celebrate all the victories we achieved. Celebrate all the lives we managed to transform. Until we meet again, Elizabeth Mitchell, a very happy mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. The reading of the letter moved the whole family. Even in her farewell, Mrs. Elizabeth managed to convey strength and hope. In the following months, Ryan decided to write a book telling the whole story from the beginning. He wanted to record not just the facts, but also the emotions, the difficulties, the personal transformations each family member had faced. The book, titled The Submerged House, A Story of Loss, Meeting and Transformation, was launched 2 years after Mrs. Elizabeth's passing. All proceeds from sales were donated to the foundation. The launch took place in Riverside, in the central square where so many family celebrations had happened. Elizabeth, now 17, read a passage from the book that spoke about the first meeting between Ryan and Mrs. Elizabeth. When I showed Mrs. Elizabeth the photographs of her family, I saw in her eyes a mix of joy and pain I will never forget. It was as if she was seeing ghosts, but beloved ghosts that brought back happy memories she thought were lost forever. In that moment, I understood I had found not just objects at the river's bottom, but a family. And not just a family for Mrs. Elizabeth, but a family for me too. The book became a national bestseller and was translated into several languages. Universities in various countries adopted the work as study material on social mobilization, human rights, and community transformation. 5 years after the book's publication, Ryan received an unexpected proposal. The United Nations invited him to be a special consultant on human rights, focusing on communities affected by major development projects. This time the decision was more difficult. Accepting would mean living in New York and working while traveling the world. Elizabeth was in her final year of high school and didn't want to leave the United States. During a family conversation, Elizabeth surprised everyone. "Dad, you've spent your whole life fighting for the rights of people here in the United States. Now it's time for you to help people in other countries who are going through the same thing Grandma Elizabeth went through. I can stay here with my aunt and uncle and continue studying. On vacations, I'll visit you." Amanda supported her daughter. "Elizabeth is right, Ryan. Your experience can help communities all over the world, and 3 years pass quickly. When we return, Elizabeth will be in college and will already be an independent adult." Ryan accepted the proposal, but with one condition. Part of his time would be dedicated to developing training programs to replicate the Riverside model in other countries. For the next 3 years, Ryan worked with communities in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, facing problems similar to those he and Mrs. Elizabeth had faced. In each country, he adapted the Elizabeth method to local characteristics, always emphasizing the importance of community participation and persistence in the fight for rights. Elizabeth, during this period, excelled in her studies and decided to pursue international relations, with the goal of working on human rights in international organizations. She spent vacations with her parents, learning about the projects Ryan was developing around the world. On one of these trips, when they visited a community in Kenya that had been displaced for the construction of a hydroelectric dam, Elizabeth was struck by the similarities to her family's story. "Dad, it's incredible how what happened to our family repeats itself in so many different places. Unfortunately, daughter, greed and abuse of power are universal problems, but courage and solidarity are also universal. That's why our work makes sense." On that trip, Elizabeth decided her undergraduate thesis would be on community models of resistance to major development projects, an international comparative analysis based on the case of Riverside. Elizabeth's thesis was so highly regarded that she received a scholarship for a master's degree at Harvard, the same university where Dr. Johnson had taught. It was a moment of great emotion for the whole family to know that the great-granddaughter of a cleaning lady with incomplete elementary education would be studying at one of the world's most prestigious universities. On the day of Elizabeth's graduation, Ryan gave an emotional speech. Mrs. Elizabeth always said that education was the most powerful tool to transform lives. Today, seeing our Elizabeth graduate with honors and receive a scholarship to Harvard, I completely understand what she meant. Elizabeth represents the third generation of our family to benefit from the transformation that began with a discovery at the bottom of a river. She will take our story and our values to the world, and that fills me with pride. Elizabeth, in her graduation speech, honored her great-grandmother. Grandma Elizabeth used to say that it doesn't matter where we come from, but where we are going. Today I understand that I am going to Harvard, not just as Elizabeth Mitchell Carter, but as a representative of a community that learned to fight for its rights. As the granddaughter of a woman who never lost hope even in the most difficult times, as the daughter of a man who dedicated his life to defending the weakest, I will carry this heritage with great pride. During her master's degree at Harvard, Elizabeth developed research on models of historical reparation for communities affected by major projects. Her advisor was impressed by the depth of her analysis and her practical experience on the subject. "Elizabeth, your research is revealing patterns and solutions that could revolutionize how international organizations handle these conflicts," said the professor. "Professor, I have an advantage. I'm not just studying this theoretically. I lived this reality, grew up hearing these stories, saw in practice how it's possible to turn tragedies into victories when there is organization, persistence, and solidarity." Elizabeth's dissertation, titled Community-Led Reparations, Lessons from the United States for International Development, was published by an American university press and became an academic reference on the subject. When she finished her master's, Elizabeth had several job offers: international organizations, NGOs, consulting firms, universities. But her choice surprised everyone. She returned to the United States to take over the leadership of the Elizabeth Mitchell Foundation. "Dad, I learned a lot abroad, but my place is here. This is where I can apply everything I've learned and continue the work that Grandma Elizabeth and you started." Ryan was moved by his daughter's decision. Elizabeth brought to the foundation an international perspective and innovative methodologies, but always respecting the original philosophy based on human care and community participation. Under Elizabeth's leadership, the foundation expanded its activities to include human rights education programs, community leadership training, and the exchange of experiences with organizations from other countries. 10 years after Elizabeth assumed the foundation's directorship, she married Richard Edward, a lawyer specializing in indigenous rights whom she met during a joint project. The wedding took place at the church in Riverside, the same one where Mrs. Elizabeth had been a cleaner and where it all began. At the altar, Elizabeth carried in her hands the same bouquet of wildflowers that Mrs. Elizabeth had carried at her wedding to Richard decades earlier. It was a way to honor her great-grandmother and keep the family's memory alive. During the celebration, Daniel, Sarah, and Michael made a joint toast to Elizabeth, who represents the continuity of a story of struggle and transformation, who represents the proof that when we plant seeds of justice and solidarity, they grow and multiply through the generations. Ryan, now 55 with graying hair, also paid his tribute. "Elizabeth, you grew up hearing the story of how a poor boy found a house at the bottom of the river and changed a family's destiny. Today, seeing you take the helm of the foundation, I understand that our story is not over. It continues through you, through the people you will help, through the transformations you will bring about. Mrs. Elizabeth would be so proud to see the strong and generous woman you have become." Elizabeth responded with emotion. "Father, uncles, family, friends, I learned from a young age that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. We are part of a community, a struggle, a story of resistance that must never stop. I promise to continue honoring Grandma Elizabeth's memory and the values she taught us. I promise to continue fighting for a world where no family has to endure the injustice our family endured." The celebration continued into the late hours, with music, dancing, and many stories being told. Among the guests were representatives from dozens of organizations inspired by the Foundation's model, families who had benefited from the programs, young people who had received scholarships, and community leaders from various regions of the country. Jennifer, the journalist who had made the story known, now over 60, made sure to attend the celebration. 25 years ago, I met a courageous boy and a strong woman who taught me that the best stories aren't fiction, they're reality. Today, seeing Elizabeth take the Foundation's leadership, I am certain this story will continue to inspire people for many generations to come. Dr. Johnson, who had retired from Harvard but continued to follow the case's development, sent a message that was read during the celebration. "Elizabeth represents the third generation of an extraordinary family that has proven that lasting social transformations are born from individual courage, grow through community organization, and endure through education and the transmission of values. Her story should be taught in all the world's schools as an example that it is possible to build a better future." 2 years after the wedding, Elizabeth and Richard Edward had their first daughter, who was named Hope, in honor of the feeling that had always guided the family through difficulties. Ryan, now a grandfather, was moved as he held Mrs. Elizabeth's great-granddaughter in his arms. "Welcome to the world, Hope. You were born into a family that learned to turn suffering into struggle, struggle into victory, and victory into inspiration for others. I hope you grow up knowing you are part of a very special story." Little Hope grew up hearing the same stories that Elizabeth had heard, how her great-grandfather Ryan found great-great-grandmother Elizabeth's house at the bottom of the river, how that discovery reunited a separated family, how the fight for justice transformed an entire community. By the age of 5, Hope already knew the family story by heart and loved telling it to her school friends. Her child's version was touching. Once upon a time there was a boy who had no mother or father, and he found a house under the water. Inside the house were pictures of a family that was lost. He gave the pictures back to the family's grandma, and then she became his mother, and the whole family was together again, and they helped many other families too. When Hope turned 10, the same age Ryan was when he found the submerged house, the family organized a special celebration. They took the girl to see all the important places in the story: the riverbank where Ryan used to dive, the house where Mrs. Elizabeth lived when they were reunited, the church where they held the first meetings, the dam memorial. At the site of the submerged house, now marked by a commemorative buoy, Ryan told Hope all the details of the discovery. "It was here, Hope, that everything began. I was looking for things to sell when I found your great-great-grandmother's house. At that moment, I didn't know I was about to find not just a family for myself, but a mission for my whole life." Hope listened to everything carefully, then asked, "Grandpa Ryan, is the house still down there?" "Yes, it is, my granddaughter. It's preserved as an underwater memorial. From time to time, experienced divers go down to photograph and document everything. Can I learn to dive to see the house? When you're old enough and can swim very well, I'll teach you." That night, during the family dinner, Hope made a declaration that moved everyone. "When I grow up, I want to help children who don't have a family, like Grandpa Ryan helped when he was little." Elizabeth hugged her daughter with pride. "You can help in many ways, my daughter, by studying, being a good person, respecting others, fighting for what's right. I want to work at the foundation too, like you and Grandpa Ryan." Richard Edwards smiled. "The foundation will always be here for you, Hope, but you can choose any path you want. The important thing is to always remember the values you learned in the family." Hope grew up actively participating in the foundation's activities. By 15, she was already accompanying Elizabeth on visits to underprivileged communities, helping organize events, and participating in educational programs about human rights. During one of these activities, when they visited a riverside community that was being threatened with removal for the construction of a hydroelectric dam, Hope was struck by the similarities to her family's story. "Mum, it's the same thing that happened to great-great-grandmother Elizabeth." "Exactly, my daughter. Unfortunately, these injustices keep happening. That's why our work is so important." "And can you help these people?" "We always try. Sometimes we manage to prevent the removal. Other times we secure fair compensation. But the most important thing is that people know they have rights and don't need to passively accept any injustice." During that visit, Hope met a girl her own age who lived in a house that would be flooded. The two talked at length, and Hope was moved by the girl's fear and sadness. On the way back, Hope was thoughtful. Finally, she said to Elizabeth, "Mom, I want to study law, like Grandpa Ryan. I want to defend people like that girl." Elizabeth smiled, remembering when she herself had made similar decisions inspired by the family's history. "It's a beautiful path, my daughter. But remember, no matter what profession you choose, what matters is using your talents to help other people." Hope graduated in law at 22, being first in her class. Her thesis was on rights of traditional communities in sustainable development projects, a topic she knew deeply through family experience. During the graduation, Ryan, now 65, gave an emotional speech. "Hope represents the fourth generation of our family to benefit from the transformation that began when I was her age. She will continue the fight for justice that Mrs. Elizabeth started, that I continued, that Elizabeth expanded." Our story proves that when we plant seeds of courage and solidarity, they grow and multiply through the generations. Hope responded, "Grandpa, I grew up knowing I am part of a special story. But today I understand that the true importance of our story is not in what has already happened, but in what we can still do. I promise to use everything I've learned to continue our family's mission, to fight for a more just and caring world." After graduation, Hope spent 2 years working at the Public Defender's Office, gaining practical experience defending people in need. Then, she returned to Riverside to take over the legal coordination of the Elizabeth Mitchell Foundation. Under her leadership, the foundation created an innovative community lawyers program. where young lawyers received specialized training to work exclusively with communities in vulnerable situations. The program was so successful that it was adopted by organizations from other states and countries. Hope became a national reference in community advocacy, being invited for lectures and consultations across the country. At 28, Hope married Gabriel Thompson, a biologist specialized in environmental impacts of large projects. The wedding took place in the same church where all generations of the family had married, maintaining the tradition. During the ceremony, the priest gave a special homily about the importance of families that pass down values through generations. We are here celebrating not only the union of Hope and Gabriel, but the continuation of a story of faith, courage, and solidarity that began over 40 years ago with the discovery of a house at the bottom of a river. This family teaches us that true treasures are not material, but values that pass from generation to generation. At the party, Ryan, now 70, gave his last major public speech. "When I was an abandoned child diving in the river for objects to survive, I never imagined that discovery would result in a family of 4 generations dedicated to the fight for social justice. Today, seeing Hope take over the leadership of the foundation, I understand that our story has no end. It continues through each person we decide to help, each injustice we manage to correct, each child who receives a better opportunity in life. Mrs. Elizabeth would be immensely proud to see how her family has grown and how her values have endured." Hope and Gabriel had 2 daughters, Sarah Elizabeth in honor of Sarah and great-grandmother Elizabeth, and Jennifer in honor of the journalist who had made the story known. Sarah Elizabeth and Jennifer grew up in a riverside very different from the town where Ryan had been a street child. The city had become prosperous, with a diversified economy based on responsible tourism, sustainable agriculture, and service provision. But it never lost its community identity nor its commitment to social justice. When Sarah Elizabeth turned 10, the family organized a special ceremony at the Dam Memorial. It was a tradition that, upon reaching the age Ryan was when he found the submerged house, each child in the family would learn every detail of the story and take on the commitment to continue the family values. Sarah Elizabeth, before the entire gathered family and community representatives, made her pledge, "I promise that I will study hard, be a good and fair person, and use my talents to help people in need. I promise never to forget that I am part of a family that learned to turn suffering into struggle, and struggle into victory for many people." Ryan, now 80 years old and using a cane, but still sharp and engaged, hugged his great-granddaughter with emotion. "Sarah Elizabeth, when I found your great-great-grandmother's house at the bottom of the river, I didn't know I was starting a story that would reach you. Today, seeing 5 generations of our family gathered here, I understand that the true house we found wasn't made of bricks and cement, but of love, justice, and solidarity. That house can never be destroyed." The ceremony was streamed live online for Foundation alumni, partner organizations, and beneficiary families who were spread across the country and the world. Thousands watched, moved, as another chapter unfolded in the story that had inspired their own struggles. After the ceremony, the family gathered at the house where Mrs. Elizabeth had lived, now transformed into a family history museum. In the backyard under the tree planted in memory of Richard, 5 generations talked about the past, the present, and the future. Elizabeth, now 50 with hair beginning to grey, shared a reflection that touched everyone. "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if that dam had never been built. Grandma Elizabeth would have kept living in her little house with the family united, but perhaps we would never have developed this awareness about human rights, this ability to fight for justice, this mission to help other people. It's strange to say this, but sometimes I'm grateful for the injustice we suffered, because it taught us things we wouldn't have learned otherwise." Hope completed her mother's thought. "It's true, Mum. Grandma Elizabeth always said that sometimes we lose one thing to gain something much greater. Our family lost a house but gained a mission. And that mission transformed not only our lives, but the lives of thousands of other people." Sarah Elizabeth, even though still a child, made a surprising observation. "Grandpa Ryan, you always say that when you found your great-grandmother's house, you cried. Why did you cry?" Ryan smiled at his great-granddaughter's innocent but profound question. I cried because, for the first time in my life, I saw what a real family was like. In the photographs, the clothes, the toys, I felt the love those people had for each other. And I cried because I wanted to have that too. And you got it, right, Grandpa? Yes, I did, my granddaughter. I got much more than I ever dreamed of when I was a child. Jennifer, the youngest daughter, just 5 years old, asked the question no one expected. Grandpa, is the house still down there under the water? Yes, it is, Jennifer. And can we go visit it? Ryan looked at Hope, who smiled and nodded positively. When you're all a little older and learn to dive properly, yes, we can go visit the house. It's still there, preserved, waiting for you. Sarah Elizabeth got excited. I want to learn to dive. I want to see the house where it all began. That night, after the children went to sleep, the adults in the family continued talking about the Foundation's future and the new challenges emerging for the human rights work. Ryan, even at 80, continued to follow all the Foundation's activities and offering advice when asked. His experience and wisdom were regularly consulted by Hope and Elizabeth. During that conversation, Ryan made a surprising revelation. Do you know that I kept a secret all these years? Everyone grew curious. Elizabeth asked, What secret, Dad? When I found Mrs. Elizabeth's house at the bottom of the river, there were 2 more submerged houses nearby. I explored them too, but I never told anyone. Hope was surprised. Really, Grandpa? Why did you never tell? Because one of them was completely destroyed, with nothing that could identify the family. And the other had documents showing the family had received the compensation correctly and moved to another city. Since there was no injustice in that case, I thought there was no need to stir things up. Elizabeth laughed. Dad, you've always been very particular about these things. It's just that I learned from Mrs. Elizabeth that our fight should always be for justice, not just for anything. If that family had been treated with dignity, there was no reason to bother them with painful memories. Gabriel, who had married Hope but always felt adopted by the family, asked a question he had been wanting to ask for a long time. Mr. Ryan, have you ever calculated how many people have been directly or indirectly helped by our family's story? Ryan thought for a few seconds. Directly, through the Foundation, it must be about 10,000 families. But indirectly, with the Ryan Act, with the programs that were created in other states, with the people who were inspired by our story to fight for their own rights, it must be over 100,000 people. Hope added, and we can't forget the next generations. Sarah Elizabeth and Jennifer will grow up knowing they have the right to fight for justice. Their children will know too. It's a legacy that multiplies exponentially. Elizabeth became emotional. Sometimes I think about Grandma Elizabeth, alone and desperate back then, thinking her life had no more meaning. If she could see all this that resulted from Dad's discovery. Ryan wiped his eyes. She sees it, my daughter. I'm sure she sees it and is proud of all of us. That early morning, Ryan had trouble sleeping. At 80 years old, he knew time was passing and wanted to ensure all the important details of the story were well documented and preserved. In the following days, he began working on a new version of his memoirs, this time focused specifically on the practical lessons the family's experience could offer to other people facing similar situations. The book, titled Resistance Manual: Practical Lessons from a Family That Didn't Give Up, was his last great contribution. Unlike the previous books which told the story, this one offered concrete guidance: how to organize as a community, how to seek legal help, how to deal with pressure from authorities, how to maintain hope during long struggles. The book launch happened on the 50th anniversary of the discovery of the submerged house. The city organized a week of celebrations with lectures, exhibitions, cultural presentations, and educational activities. Representatives from more than 20 countries came to Riverside to participate in the celebrations. The small town became officially an international center for studies on community resistance and human rights. During the main ceremony, Ryan gave his final speech. 50 years ago, a 10-year-old boy dove into the river looking for objects to sell and found a house that changed his life and the lives of thousands of others. Today, that boy is an 80-year-old man who had the privilege of seeing his discovery turn into a story of social transformation. But the most important thing is not what has already happened, it's what can still happen. Each one of you here today can be the protagonist of the next great story of courage and justice. Do not wait for others to do it for you. Have the courage to dive deep in search of truth and justice. The audience rose and applauded for long minutes. Among those present were children who had received scholarships from the foundation and were now doctors, engineers, teachers, families who had been helped by the legal programs, community leaders from various parts of the world, researchers and students interested in the model developed in Riverside. Sarah Elizabeth, now 15 years old, gave a presentation about the family's fifth generation. I represent the fifth generation of a family that learned to transform injustice into struggle, struggle into victory, and victory into inspiration for others. I promise our story will not stop with me. I will continue studying, growing, and preparing to take on, at the right time, the mission my great-great-grandfather began 50 years ago. 3 years after the 50th anniversary celebrations, Ryan passed away peacefully in his sleep at 83. He was in the house where he had lived with Mrs. Elizabeth, surrounded by the family photographs he had recovered from the river bottom so many decades before. Ryan's funeral was a celebration of his extraordinary life. Thousands of people came from across the country and from several other countries to say goodbye to the man who had become an international symbol of resistance and hope. Elizabeth gave the main tribute. "My father taught me that true wealth is not in what we have, but in what we are able to do for others. He left knowing his life had meaning, that his discovery transformed the world for thousands of people. But more than that, he left knowing his mission will continue through all of us who learned from him, that we must never give up fighting for what is right." Hope, now definitively taking over the leadership of the foundation, promised, "Grandpa Ryan always said our story wasn't about him, but about anyone's courage to face injustice. I promise to continue his work, but more than that, I promise to continue inspiring others to discover their own courage to fight for a better world." Sarah Elizabeth, although only 18, gave a speech that moved everyone present. "My great-grandfather taught me that it doesn't matter where we come from or how old we are. We can always make a difference. He proved that when he was 10 years old and found a house at the bottom of the river. Today, at 18, I promise to continue proving that through my life and my choices." After the funeral, the family gathered to read a letter Ryan had left. "My dear family, if you are reading this letter, it is because my journey on this earth has come to an end. Do not be sad for me. I lived far more than an abandoned boy could dream. When I found Mrs. Elizabeth's house at the bottom of the river, I was looking for objects to sell, but I found much more. I found a family, a purpose, a mission. I found proof that it is possible to transform any tragedy into an opportunity for growth and service to others. Elizabeth, my daughter of the heart, thank you for loving me as a true son and for giving me wonderful grandchildren and great-grandchildren. You taught me that being a father has nothing to do with blood, but with love and dedication. Hope, my granddaughter, you represent all that is best in our family. Intelligence, courage, generosity, and determination. Continue leading the foundation with wisdom and love. Sarah, Elizabeth, and Jennifer, my beloved great-granddaughters, you represent the future. Grow up knowing you are part of a special story, but always remember, the importance of this story is not in the past, but in the future you will build. To the whole family, stay united, keep fighting for justice, keep helping those most in need. The house I found at the bottom of the river gave me a family, but the house we built together is made of love, values, and purposes that no one can destroy. Do not mourn for me. Celebrate everything we lived through together. Celebrate all the people we managed to help, and keep writing new chapters of this story that should never end. With all my love and gratitude, Ryan Mitchell, forever grateful for the family the river gave me. The reading of the letter sealed the entire family's commitment to continue the legacy of Ryan and Mrs. Elizabeth. Sarah Elizabeth, inspired by her great-grandfather's words, decided to study journalism, aiming to tell the stories of courageous people who fight for justice. Jennifer, still a child, already showed interest in social work and talked about following in the family's footsteps. The Elizabeth Mitchell Foundation, under Hope's leadership, continued to grow and expand. Similar programs were implemented in dozens of countries, always adapted to local realities, but maintaining the fundamental principles: community participation, human welcome, and persistence in the fight for rights. 20 years after Ryan's passing, Sarah Elizabeth became a respected investigative journalist, specializing in reports on communities facing injustices related to major projects. Her work always began by explaining her personal motivation. "My great-grandfather taught me that the best stories are not fiction, they are reality, and the most important realities are those that many people prefer to hide, the daily struggle of ordinary people for dignity and justice." Jennifer took a different but equally important path. She became a psychologist, specializing in working with families who have experienced trauma related to forced displacement. Her work at the foundation included not only the legal aspect, but also the emotional support necessary for people to rebuild after great losses. The two sisters worked in a complementary way. Sarah Elizabeth investigated and denounced injustices. Jennifer helped people recover emotionally from the traumas they suffered. When Sarah Elizabeth turned 30, she married a documentary filmmaker who specialized in filming stories of community resistance around the world. Together, they created a documentary series titled Submerged Houses, which told stories similar to Riversides in different countries. Jennifer married an anthropologist who studied the cultural impact of major infrastructure works on traditional communities. His academic works always cited the family's history as an example of resistance and reconstruction. Both had children who grew up intimately knowing the family history and preparing to eventually take on the continuity of the mission started by Ryan and Mrs. Elizabeth. In 2085, 100 years after the discovery of the submerged house, Riverside organized a worldwide celebration that attracted representatives from 50 countries. The city had officially become the world center for studies on community resistance. During the celebrations, an underwater museum was inaugurated at the site of Mrs. Elizabeth's former house. Divers could visit the preserved house and see, through underwater explanatory plaques, how it all began. Sarah Elizabeth, now 60 years old and internationally recognized as one of the leading investigative journalists of her generation, gave the main speech. 100 years ago, a 10-year-old boy found a house at the bottom of this river and cried upon seeing the photographs of a family that had been separated by an injustice. Today, 6 generations later, we are a family of thousands of people spread across the entire world, united by the certainty that it is worth fighting for justice, that we should never give up on our rights, and that we should always help those most in need. Jennifer added, "The house our great-grandfather found at the bottom of the river was made of wood and brick, and it withstood 100 years under the water. But the house he built with us is made of values and purpose, and that house is eternal. It continues to grow through every person who is inspired by our story to fight for a better world." During the celebration, it was announced that the UN had created the Ryan and Elizabeth Award to annually recognize individuals or organizations that excel in the fight for the rights of communities affected by major development projects. The first award was symbolically presented to the Mitchell family, represented by Sarah Elizabeth and Jennifer. But they announced they would pass the award on to a young activist from Sudan who was leading her community's resistance against a mining project that threatened their ancestral lands. "Our great-grandfather and our great-great-grandmother did not fight to receive awards or recognition," said Sarah Elizabeth. "They fought because it was the right thing to do. In the same way, this award should go to those who are fighting now, not to those who have already completed their mission." The young activist from Sudan, Amina Hassan, only 17 years old, received the award emotionally and said, "The story of the Mitchell family inspired me not to give up when it seemed we were too small to face a multinational corporation. Now I understand that no matter our age or our background, we can always make a difference if we have courage and determination." This passing of the torch symbolized what has always been the essence of the family's story. It is not about special people, but about ordinary people who found the courage to do what was right. End of story. Now tell me what you thought of this incredible story of overcoming and struggle. Do you believe it's possible to transform a great injustice into strength to help thousands of other people? Leave your opinions in the comments, and if you know similar stories of people who didn't give up fighting for their rights. If this story touched you as much as it moved us to tell it, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot to continue bringing stories that inspire and show that courage and solidarity can change the world.